3 of the 5 medications I'm about to cover require no prescription. You can walk into any pharmacy today and buy them off the shelf. And that is exactly what makes them so dangerous after 65. Because when something requires no prescription, we stop thinking of it as a drug. We think of it as harmless. And for a body that has crossed 65, that assumption can have serious and avoidable consequences for your health and independence. Before we go through each one, I want to explain something that makes this entire conversation make sense. Because if you understand this one thing, everything else in this video clicks into place. 3 of the 65. Your body processes medications differently than it did 20 years ago. Your kidneys filter drugs from your bloodstream more slowly. Kidney filtration rate declines roughly 1% every year after 40, meaning by 65 you may have 25% less clearance than you did at 40. Your liver metabolizes compounds more slowly, and certain parts of your brain become significantly more sensitive to sedatives and a class of compounds I will explain shortly. Think of it this way. Imagine a drug as water going into a bathtub. When you were 45, the drain was wide open. By 65, that drain is partially blocked. Your same amount of water coming in, but far less going out. The level keeps rising. That is what is happening with several common medications in an older body. The dose has not changed. The body processing it has. All 5 medications I am covering today appear on the American Geriatrics Society Beers criteria, a rigorously maintained evidence-based list of medications considered potentially inappropriate for older adults. The 2023 update reviewed over 1,500 clinical studies. This is the standard reference in geriatric medicine. I am Dr. Isabella Morgan, and I will be drawing on that criteria and the peer-reviewed research that underlies it. Let us go through them one at a time. The first category is benzodiazepines, the names you likely recognize: Xanax, Valium, Ativan, Klonopin, prescribed primarily for anxiety and insomnia. They work in the short term. That effectiveness is precisely why they have been prescribed so widely for decades and precisely why they cause so many problems in older adults. Here is what is happening physiologically. After 65, the liver breaks down benzodiazepines more slowly. The drug does not fully clear between doses. It accumulates. A dose taken at 1000 p.m. to help you sleep may still be measurably active in your system when you get up at 3:00 a.m. for a glass of water. You feel completely, normal. You feel awake, but your coordination and reaction time are still impaired. The research on fall risk is consistent across the literature. A large nationwide case crossover study published in 2022 screened over 6.3 million fall and fracture cases among community-dwelling elderly patients. Long-acting benzodiazepines more than doubled the risk of falls or fractures, an odds ratio of 2.16. To translate that number plainly, if we expect roughly 10 in every 100 older adults to experience a fall in a given period, this drug pushes that closer to 20. That is not a small effect. That is a doubling. A separate meta-analysis across 248 studies confirmed the association. Pooled odds ratio for benzodiazepines and falls was 1.42 across all studies and 1.8181 specifically for long-acting formulations beyond falls, and this is something that does not get discussed clearly enough. Benzodiazepines consistently impair memory, attention, and processing speed in older adults, even in people who feel they have fully adapted to the medication. The brain adaptation people describe is real. The cognitive impairment continues underneath it. The 2023 Beers criteria lists the entire benzodiazepine class as drugs to avoid in older adults. All short, intermediate, and long-acting forms, citing cognitive impairment, delirium, falls, and fractures as the primary concerns. One thing I need to say clearly before we continue: do not stop benzodiazepines on your own. Withdrawal without medical supervision can cause life-threatening seizures. Coming off these medications is a supervised taper, a conversation with your prescribing doctor. I will tell you exactly how to approach that before the end of this video. I want to ask you a direct question. Are you or someone in your family currently taking any of the medications I will be covering today? Leave a comment below. I want to understand how many people watching this are actually affected. The second medication will surprise you more than the first because it costs about $6 and it sits on an open shelf at every pharmacy in the country. Diphenhydramine sold as Benadryl for allergies and as the active sleep ingredient in Zosquil, Unisum sleep tabs, and Tylenol PM. Tens of millions of older adults take this every single night, operating on the belief that no prescription means no significant risk. I want to explain clearly why that reasoning does not apply here. Diphenhydramine is a first-generation antihistamine with potent anticholinergic properties. Anticholinergic means it blocks acetylcholine, the primary neurotransmitter your brain uses for memory and learning. Think of acetylcholine as the chemical that keeps your memory circuits running. Diphenhydramine suppresses it broadly across the entire brain, not just in the areas involved in sleep. That broad suppression is why it makes you drowsy. It is not a targeted sleep mechanism. It is a chemical dimming of brain activity. Researchers have been examining what happens when that dimming occurs night after night for months and years. A landmark prospective cohort study published in JAMA Internal Medicine in 2015, led by Dr. Shelley Gray at the University of Washington, followed 434 adults age 65 and older with no dementia at baseline for an average of 7.3 years. Researchers used actual pharmacy dispensing records, not self-reports, to measure cumulative drug exposure. In the highest cumulative use category, equivalent to daily use of a strong anticholinergic for more than 3 years, participants showed a 54% higher risk of developing dementia compared to non-users. A dose-response relationship was observed. The more cumulative exposure, the higher the risk. The most commonly used anticholinergic drugs in that study were first-generation antihistamines, the exact class diphenhydramine belongs to. A second study published in JAMA Internal Medicine in 2019 examined 769 dementia patients against 25,574 match controls and found consistent associations across anticholinergic drug classes. Now, I want to be precise about what this evidence shows and what it does not, because this distinction matters. These are observational studies. They demonstrate a statistical association between cumulative anticholinergic use and dementia risk. They do not prove that diphenhydramine directly causes dementia in any individual. The authors were careful to acknowledge this. Observational research cannot rule out all confounding factors. What the body of evidence does establish is sufficient concern that the American Geriatrics Society Beers criteria explicitly lists diphenhydramine as a drug to avoid in older adults for cognitive and central nervous system risk. The practical question is not whether causation is proven beyond all scientific doubt. The practical question is this: is there a reason to take this drug nightly? When safer, more effective alternatives exist, I will cover those alternatives in the action section at the end. Did you know that diphenhydramine is the active sleep ingredient in Tylenol PM and Zosquil? Leave a comment, just yes or no. I ask because it matters. How many people watching this were unaware? The third medication is what most people reach for the moment their knees or back flare up: ibuprofen and naproxen, Advil, Motrin, Ailey, for occasional use in younger healthy adults. These non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs are generally manageable. For regular use in adults over 65, the risk picture changes significantly, and here is what makes this particularly concerning. The damage it causes develops without any warning symptom. No pain, no signal. It advances without you knowing. Let me explain the kidney problem first, because it is the most important one. Your kidneys are responsible for filtering these drugs from your bloodstream. But ibuprofen and naproxen do something else. They constrict the blood vessels that supply the kidneys themselves, reducing flow to the very organ that is supposed to be clearing the drug. In a younger person with full kidney reserve, the body compensates easily. In someone over 65 operating at reduced filtration capacity, that constriction can push the kidneys into acute injury. A systematic review and meta-analysis published in BMC Nephrology found that in older adults, specifically, NSAID use was associated with an odds ratio of 2.5 to 1 for acute kidney injury, roughly 2.5 times the baseline risk. A 2018 cross-sectional study found that 42% of elderly adults purchasing NSAIDs over the counter already had kidney function below the safe threshold for these drugs, and most had no idea because reduced kidney function produces no symptoms until it is already significantly advanced. On the gastrointestinal side, non-selective NSAIDs increase the risk of a serious gastrointestinal bleed fourfold. When a GI bleed occurs in someone taking an NSAID, the mortality rate is 21% compared to 7% in patients not taking them. The stomach lining becomes more fragile with age, and NSAIDs directly impair its protective barrier. For those with high blood pressure or heart disease, all NSAIDs increase systolic blood pressure, promote fluid retention, and double the risk of hospitalization for heart failure. The 2023 Beers criteria lists oral non-co-selective NSAIDs as drugs to avoid in older adults unless other alternatives are not effective, specifically flagging increased GI, kidney, and cardiovascular risk. Do you currently use ibuprofen or naproxen regularly for joint or back pain? Comment yes or no below because in the action section I will tell you what the evidence shows actually works for osteoarthritis pain in older adults without these risks. The fourth medication is prescribed to roughly 10 million Americans annually for sleep, zolpidem sold as Ambien. Let me start with what the FDA documented directly. On January 10, 2013, the FDA issued a formal safety communication requiring manufacturers to lower the recommended doses of all zolpidem-containing products. The reasons stated in that communication: blood levels of zolpidem the morning after taking the drug can be high enough to impair driving and activities requiring full alertness even after a full 8 hours of sleep. The FDA's own data showed that 8 hours after a standard 10 milligram dose, 15% of women still had blood levels above the threshold for impairment. In older adults, the drug clears even more slowly. Here is what I want you to understand about that finding. The morning impairment from zolpidem does not feel like impairment. You wake up feeling rested, feeling normal, but your coordination and reaction time are measurably compromised, and your brain does not register the gap between how you feel and how you are actually functioning. That disconnect is what makes this drug specifically dangerous. When someone gets up in the night. On fracture risk, a case control study published in the Journal of the American Geriatrics Society examined 1,222 hip fracture cases and 4,188 matched controls, all aged 65 and older, all enrolled in Medicare. Zolpidem use was associated with nearly twice the risk of hip fracture-adjusted odds ratio 1.95. I want to note that one large Taiwanese case crossover study found no significant association after full adjustment. The evidence is broadly consistent, but it is not unanimous, and I want you to have the full picture. What is not in dispute is this: hip fractures in adults over 65 carry approximately a 1 in 5 risk of death within the following year from complications including blood clots and pneumonia during recovery. There is a second problem with zolpidem that receives far less attention than the fall risk. Research comparing it directly with CBTI, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, found that zolpidem reduced time in slow-wave restorative sleep, while CBTI increased it. You fall asleep faster on zolpidem, but the sleep is structurally poorer. The deep restorative stages are suppressed. This is why dose escalation and continued use are so common. The drug addresses the symptom while quietly worsening what drives it. The fifth medication on this list surprises people more than any other, because most people would never think of it as dangerous at all. Proton pump inhibitors, omeprazole, Prilosec, Nexium, Prilosec among the most widely prescribed drug classes in the world, for short-term use, 4 to 8 weeks. For a confirmed ulcer or significant acid reflux, they are appropriate and effective. The clinical problem is duration. Most older adults taking these medications are not on an 8-week course. Many have been on them for years. In some cases, the original reason for prescribing them resolved long before anyone thought to ask whether the prescription was still necessary. Long-term PPI use is associated with depletion of two nutrients that matters significantly for neurological and cardiac function in older adults. The first is vitamin B12. Your stomach acid performs a specific function. It releases B12 from the protein it is bound to in food, making it available for absorption. Suppress that acid continuously for years, and B12 absorption falls. A large case control study published in JAMA in 2013 examined 25,056 patients diagnosed with B12 deficiency against 199 match controls. Those who had received more than a 2-year supply of a PPI had 65% higher odds of B12 deficiency, odds ratio 1.65. A 2022 meta-analysis across 25 studies found a pooled odds ratio of 1.4242 with meaningful variation between studies. Now, I want to share something from that original 2013 data that most health content omits entirely. The association between PPI use and B12 deficiency was strongest in younger patients and became progressively weaker with advancing age. In patients over 80, the odds ratio dropped to 1.04, no longer statistically significant. This likely reflects that older adults often have multiple independent reasons for reduced B12 absorption already. The implication is not that PPIs are safe in the elderly on this front. It is that anyone on long-term PPIs at any age should have their B12 level checked. It is a simple blood test. In older adults, significant B12 deficiency causes peripheral neuropathy, the tingling and numbness in hands and feet, and cognitive changes that can genuinely resemble early dementia. The second nutrient is magnesium. The FDA issued a specific drug safety communication warning about dangerously low magnesium hypomagnesemia in patients on long-term PPIs. Low magnesium disrupts heart rhythm and nerve signaling in ways that compound other cardiac and neurological risks. The issue is not that PPIs are inherently dangerous. Used correctly for the right indication, for the right duration, they are effective medications. The issue is that they are among the most commonly continued drugs past the point of clinical necessity. If you have been on a PPI for more than 6 months without anyone reviewing whether you still need it, that review is overdue. Here is exactly what I want you to do with this information. Write down every medication you take, prescription and over-the-counter. Every single one, the Benadryl, the Advil, the Prilosec. Over-the-counter means no prescription is required. It does not mean the drug is without risk for your body at your age. Take that list to your doctor and ask for a medication review, specifically requesting evaluation against the American Geriatrics Society Beers criteria. Those exact words will be immediately understood. For pain, ask your doctor about acetaminophen as a first-line option. At the correct dose, no more than 3,000 milligrams total per day for adults over 65. It is significantly safer for kidneys and the GI tract than NSAIDs. For sleep, ask for a referral to cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, known as CBTI. Multiple randomized controlled trials show CBTI outperforms every sleep medication for long-term outcomes. No drug interactions, no dependency, no morning impairment. It is the evidence-based first-line treatment for chronic insomnia in older adults. If you have been on a PPI for more than 6 months, ask your doctor whether you still need it and ask whether your B12 level has been tested. Before we close, and I say this because it matters clinically, not as a disclaimer, do not stop any prescription medication on your own. Benzodiazepine withdrawal without medical supervision can cause seizures for anyone managing heart disease, kidney disease, or multiple chronic conditions simultaneously. Any medication change requires careful, coordinated oversight. These 5 medications are not dangerous for every person in every situation. Dose, duration, individual health status, and the reason for prescribing all matter. What the research consistently shows is that in adults over 65 used long-term without periodic reassessment, these drugs carry documented and avoidable risks. Your body has changed since some of these prescriptions were first written. Your medication list may need to reflect that. Leave a comment with one of 3 things. Write "reviewing my list" if you are checking your medications after this. Write your age and which of these 5 you want to raise with your doctor, or write "sharing this" if you are sending this to someone you care about. Subscribe because next week I am covering 5 supplement combinations that are quietly dangerous for older adults, including combinations currently being sold together in the same product as if they are perfectly safe. That video could protect someone you